stop scrolling. Seriously, stop. Because if you think you know the Boston Tea Party, you're about to realize your high school history teacher was lying to you, probably while collecting a pension for boring history. You're about to witness the ultimate history roast! An unfiltered look at one of America's most celebrated acts of defiance. And trust me, it's going to be brutal. This isn't just weird history. This is the absurd history you've been craving, delivered by your friendly neighborhood meme historian. We're talking about the exact moment when the ancestors of today, internet Karens, decided to invent public protesting, and spoiler alert, it involved a whole lot of wasted tea, even more self-importance, and a shocking lack of actual strategy. So, buckle up, buttercups! Because this is Midnight Meme Historia, and we're about to dive into why you would instantly die as a Viking warrior, but that's not this video. Today, we're unpacking the Boston Tea Party, a true historical fail of epic proportions. Now, before you reach for your butt taxation without representation, placards, let's inject a healthy dose of dark humor history into this patriotic fever dream. Forget the noble patriot. We're talking about a bunch of disgruntled merchants, smugglers, and a general populace who, let's be real, didn't want to pay for anything if they didn't absolutely have to. Sound familiar? It's like watching an online influencer complain about brand deals while simultaneously demanding free stuff. The sheer audacity of it all is, frankly, breathtaking. It's history uncensored, baby. The year is 1773, and the British Empire, fresh off winning the 7 Years' War, which, let's be honest, was basically a global brawl over who got to be the biggest. Bully on the playground was in a bit of a financial pickle. War is expensive. Turns out, who knew? So, like any cash-strapped government, they started looking for ways to shake down their subjects. And who better to shake than the colonists across the pond who were, by all accounts, living their best lives, relatively speaking. This wasn't some grand conspiracy, folks. It was just the 18th century version of an IRS audit, but with more powdered wigs and less TurboTax. The British government, bless their colonial hearts, decided the best way to recoup some of their war debts was to tax everything from sugar to stamps. And then, the big one, tea. Now, for the modern mind, this might seem quaint. Oh, the horror. A tax on tea. But back then, tea was less a beverage and more a foundational pillar of societal existence. It was their Starbucks, their energy drink, their entire social calendar rolled into one steaming cup of brown leaves. To tax tea was to attack their very way of life. Much like someone trying to ban TikTok in 2025 would trigger an existential crisis among Gen Z. It's an unfiltered history lesson in the making. Enter the East India Company, a corporate behemoth that makes Amazon look like a local manned pop shop. This company was basically the British government's favorite crony, a colossal entity with its own army, its own territories, and a monopoly on, you guessed it, tea. But here's the juicy part. The East India Company was struggling. They had warehouses overflowing with tea they couldn't sell because, get this, colonists were busy smuggling in cheaper Dutch tea. That's right. These patriots were basically engaging in ancient world tax evasion, pulling off an 18th century version of an offshore bank account. Holy shit! Really? Yes! This actually happened! No, we're not making this up. So, the British Parliament, in their infinite wisdom, passed the Tea Act of 1773. The idea? To save the East India Company from bankruptcy by allowing them to sell tea directly to the colonies, cutting out the middleman colonial merchants, and making their tea even cheaper than the smuggled stuff. Sounds like a good deal, right? Cheaper tea! For everyone! Except there was still a small tax on it, and that's where our colonial Karens decided to draw the line. It wasn't about the price. Oh no. It was about the principle, or, more accurately, the principle of them not getting to profit from smuggling. It's like Elon Musk complaining about taxes while buying another social media platform, entirely missing the point of public service. This is where the political machinations get as convoluted as a Canaan conspiracy theory. The colonial merchants, who were basically losing money because of this cheaper legal tea, started screaming about taxation without representation. And while that's a catchy slogan, let's unpack it, shall we? They didn't want representation so much as they wanted to be left alone to do their illicit business unimpeded. It's the original "don't tread on me," but with a side of "and let me keep my smuggling profits." This makes for some prime history for adults. The stage was set. Folks, 3 ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, laden with East India Company tea, sailed into Boston Harbor. Now, if this were a modern protest, you'd expect a carefully choreographed TikTok dance, maybe some signs, perhaps a few self-important speeches filmed for Instagram. But these were the good old days, when protests involved slightly more destruction and considerably less filter. Samuel Adams, a man whose modern equivalent would probably be a charismatic but slightly unhinged podcast host who keeps yelling about the system, rallied the Sons of Liberty. These weren't your Boy Scouts, folks. These were the tough guys, the brawlers, the guys who knew how to start a ruckus, and their plan to dress up like Native Americans. Because nothing screams authentic local protest like cultural appropriation. Am I right? It's the ultimate history meme, decades before memes were even a twinkle in the internet's eye. On the night of December 16th, 1773, a crowd of thousands gathered at the Old South Meeting House. The atmosphere was probably thick with the smell of stale ale and unwashed bodies. Because, let's be real, hygiene was an optional extra in the 18th century. You thought Vikings had it bad? These guys were barely a step up. Imagine a mosh pit at a heavy metal concert, but everyone is wearing itchy wool and hasn't seen a bar of soap in a week. It's no wonder they were so angry. Their own stink was probably offensive. The famous line, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country," was supposedly uttered, a signal for the Mohawks to spring into action. And by Mohawks, I mean a bunch of pasty-faced colonists in hilariously bad costumes. It's like watching your friend's dad try to fit in at Coachella. Bless his heart. They marched down to Griffin's Wharf, a place that probably smelled like dead fish and desperation. Just like a modern-day airport bathroom after a long-haul flight. They boarded the ships, and here's where the actual party began. For 3 hours, these brave, tea-hating souls systematically dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbor. That's 92,000 pounds of tea, folks. The equivalent of about $1.7 million in today's money. Think about that. They didn't want to pay a tiny tax, so they decided to destroy millions of dollars worth of property. It's like being mad about your gas bill and then setting your car on fire. Modern problems, ancient stupidity. Now, I can see you in the comments already, but Midnight Meme Historian, it was a symbolic act of defiance. And to that, I say, sure, honey, just like my diet starts tomorrow is a symbolic act of willpower. These guys weren't just making a statement, they were actively damaging corporate assets. It's basically the original cancel culture. But instead of tweeting angry messages, they were committing grand larceny. And frankly, the ocean probably thanked them for the extra flavor. Imagine the fish trying to explain to their grandkids why the harbor suddenly tasted like a stale chai latte. The British response was, predictably, not amused. This wasn't just a bunch of hooligans. This was an attack on private property and the sacred right of a government to get its money. It was like a disgruntled former employee deciding to deface the company logo with a permanent marker. Only the marker was a whole harbor full of tea. The British Parliament, probably sipping their own tax tea and wondering what fresh hell was brewing in the colonies, passed the coercive acts, or, as the colonists called them, the intolerable acts. Because, of course, everything was intolerable to them. These acts basically shut down Boston Harbor until the tea was paid for, revoked Massachusetts' charter, and basically turned the colony into a military zone. It was the 18th century equivalent of putting a city on lockdown, because a bunch of entitled teenagers threw a wild party and trashed the neighborhood. And you know what? Fair enough. You break it! You buy it! Or, in this case, you dump it! You pay for it! But these guys decided, nah, we'd rather start a whole revolution. It's historical comedy at its finest. But wait, it gets worse. The British also implemented the Quartering Act, forcing colonists to house British soldiers. Now, Imagine if, in 2025, the government decided that because you complained about your broadband bill, you now had to host a squad of 20-something constantly online, unwashed military personnel in your spare bedroom. You think your privacy is invaded now? Try sharing a single outhouse with a redcoat who probably thinks bathing is for dandies. That's a level of intolerable I think even modern influencers would struggle to monetize. This entire saga is just one colossal historical fail after another. The British, desperate for cash, tried a heavy-handed approach. The colonists, desperate to avoid taxes and protect their illicit trade, overreacted with property destruction. And then, everyone escalated. Like a Twitter argument that spiraled into a full-blown Doxan cancel campaign. It's almost beautiful in its predictable stupidity, isn't it? S.Y. Midnight Meme Historian exists to point out that humans have always been this ridiculous. So, the Boston Tea Party, often framed as a noble act, was essentially a temper tantrum thrown by disgruntled merchants and their street muscle, disguised as a principled stand against tyranny. It was a marketing genius move, though they rebranded tax evasion and property damage as freedom fighting. Imagine if today, every time someone avoided a parking ticket, they called themselves a freedom warrior. We'd have more heroes than Marvel movies. And the irony? A lot of these patriots were wealthy landowners and merchants who benefited immensely from the British system until it started to inconvenience them personally. They were basically the one-percenters of their time. But instead of buying private jets, they were hoarding vast tracts of land and dodging import duties. Do you think Jeff Bezos cares about the little guy? These guys cared about their bottom line, and a tax on tea was hitting it directly. It's a sarcastic documentary about human nature. What's even dumber is how quickly this whole incident spiraled. It's like when someone posts a slightly controversial opinion on social media, and within 72 hours, it's a national scandal, they're being canceled, and their career is over. The Boston Tea Party was the original viral post that went horribly wrong for everyone involved. Except for the fish, I guess. They probably got a nice caffeine buzz for a few days. And don't even get me started on the actual logistics. Dressing up as Native Americans. Why? Because they thought it would deflect blame. Oh, it wasn't us. It was those wild, untamed savages. What a brilliant strategy. It's like wearing a disguise to rob a bank, but the disguise is just a poorly drawn mustache and a hat that says, "Not me." The sheer comedic ineptitude of it all is stunning. This is truly history for adults who appreciate the dark, dark humor of it all. This entire chapter of weird history makes you wonder. Did these guys actually think about the long-term consequences? Or was it just pure, unadulterated, short-sighted rage, fueled by too much rum and too little common sense? I'm leaning towards the latter. It's the 18th century equivalent of a dude screaming, "Let's go," before doing something incredibly stupid on TikTok, all for the likes. The likes, in this case, being freedom and not paying taxes. And the fact that we celebrate this as a pivotal moment in the American Revolution, it's glorious. It is, like celebrating the time your annoying uncle finally snapped and threw a turkey at Thanksgiving dinner simply because it led to a dramatic family intervention. Was it necessary? Probably not. Was it entertaining? Absolutely. Did it solve anything immediately? Not really. It just made things infinitely worse before they got better. This is why Midnight Meme Historian exists, to point out the glorious, self-destructive patterns of humanity. Think about it. The British were essentially running a global empire. They had bigger fish to fry than a few thousand disgruntled colonists throwing a glorified frat party with tea. But they couldn't let it slide. Because if you let one group of colonists get away with it, soon every other colony would start dumping their tea, or whatever their equivalent was. Oh, the Jamaicans are throwing their sugar into the sea! And the Indians are burning their spices? This is getting out of hand. It's the domino effect of disobedience. This whole taxation without representation thing also rings Hollow when you consider that a huge chunk of the British population also didn't have direct representation in Parliament. It wasn't exactly a beacon of democracy back then. So, these colonists were essentially saying, we demand the same representation as you deny your own people. It's a level of hypocrisy that would make a modern politician blush if modern politicians were capable of blushing. Which, let's be real, they're not. They're too busy gaslighting us all. And the irony continues. After they gained independence, what did the newly formed United States do? They started taxing their own citizens. Surprise? It turns out governments need money to operate. Who knew? It's like complaining about your rent, moving out, and then realizing you still have to pay rent, just to a different landlord. The cycle of bureaucratic annoyance. Truly, a historical fail that transcends centuries. The Boston Tea Party wasn't just about tea. It was about power, greed, and a fundamental misunderstanding of consequences. It was a group of people saying, we don't like the rules, so we're going to break them in the most dramatic way possible and then act surprised when you punish us. It's the origin story of every entitled person who gets mad when their actions have repercussions. Sounds familiar? Doesn't it? Just check any comment section on YouTube for similar displays of self-righteous fury. Now, let's talk about the cultural impact. The Boston Tea Party became this legendary event, a symbol of American defiance. But at its core, it was a bunch of guys committing an act of vandalism over a relatively small tax. Imagine if today, every time there was a minor inconvenience, we responded with millions of dollars in property damage. We'd be living in a constant state of chaos. Oh, wait. We kind of are. So, maybe the colonists were just ahead of their time. After all, the Sons of Liberty, these supposed heroes, were essentially a gang. A patriotic gang, sure, but a gang nonetheless. They used intimidation, coercion, and mob mentality to achieve their goals. It's like a disgruntled Reddit forum deciding to take matters into their own hands. But instead of crashing a stock, they're crashing the global tea market. The brutal history of it all is that patriots often look an awful lot like criminals, depending on whose side you're on. And let's not forget the sheer waste of it all. All that perfectly good tea just dumped into the harbor. Imagine the outrage today if someone destroyed that much product over a political disagreement. We'd have environmentalists screaming, economists weeping, and influencers making 27 videos about how to repurpose harbor-soaked tea leaves. The colonists were truly the original zero-waste movement, but in the most destructive way possible. The event itself was a classic example of escalation. Britain imposes taxes. Colonists protest. Britain doubles down. Colonists throw tea. Britain gets really mad. And then, before you know it, muskets are being fired, and people are dying. It's like a sibling rivalry that starts with a stolen cookie and ends with one of them moving to a different continent and refusing to speak to the other for 250 years. The human capacity for holding grudges and escalating conflict is truly oins. So, the next time you hear someone waxing poetic about the Boston Tea Party, remember this. It was a mixture of corporate bailouts, tax evasion, performative activism, and a whole lot of wasted tea. It wasn't just a revolution. It was a revolution fueled by petty grievances and a shocking lack of foresight. It's the kind of history for adults that makes you question everything you thought you knew. And that, my friends, is the Midnight Meme Historian. Promise? Now, you're probably wondering what the actual fuck caused this level of coordinated, yet seemingly idiotic defiance to actually succeed in the long run. I'll tell you in a minute. But first, let's not forget that in the grand scheme of the British Empire, the American colonies were a bit of a backwater. They weren't India, with its spices and silks, or the Caribbean, with its sugar plantations. They were largely a bunch of stubborn, self-reliant farmers and traders in a cold, distant land. The British probably thought of them as that annoying distant cousin who always complains about everything at family gatherings. And the British governors? Oh, the The governors, they were basically the political equivalent of middle managers stuck between a demanding corporate overlord parliament and a bunch of whiny, entitled employees, the colonists. They had impossible quotas to meet, collect taxes, and an equally impossible task of managing a population that openly despised them. It's like being a regional director for a failing retail chain, trying to enforce corporate policy on a bunch of indifferent Gen Z employees. You're doomed from the start. The decision-making on both sides was just a cascade of dumb. Britain thought, let's put a tiny tax on tea. They'll barely notice. The colonists thought, aha, a tiny tax. This is the hill we die on, even though we were smuggling it anyway. It's like two toddlers fighting over a broken toy, each convinced they are morally superior. The sheer lack of diplomatic finesse on display is truly breathtaking. It's a historical fail that gave birth to a nation, and these Sons of Liberty. Their name sounds like a boy band that never quite made it big, but in reality, they were more like a loosely organized street gang with a political agenda. They operated with a blend of revolutionary fervor and good old-fashioned thuggery. They weren't just debating ideas in coffee houses. They were enforcing boycotts, intimidating loyalists, and generally making life miserable for anyone who did you unsubscribe to their particular brand of freedom. It's the unfiltered history of how movements actually gain traction, with a healthy dose of coercion. One of the true holy shit, really, moments of this entire period is how utterly disconnected the British government was from the reality on the ground in the colonies. They were literally thousands of miles away, relying on slow, unreliable communications. Their decisions were based on outdated information and a profound lack of understanding of colonial culture. It's like a CEO in Silicon Valley trying to run a factory in a rural town, based solely on PowerPoint presentations and without ever setting foot on the factory floor. They're just guessing, and usually guessing wrong. The Boston Tea Party also highlights a fundamental flaw in human nature: the inability to compromise. Both sides dug in their heels. Britain said, "You will pay the tax." Colonists said, "We will not." And then things just escalated into violence. It's the blueprint for every stupid argument you've ever had with your family during the holidays, but with more musket fire and less pumpkin pie. Why can't anyone just sit down, have a sensible conversation, and then agree to disagree? Because humans, that's why. We're wired for drama. Apparently. And the idea that this was purely about taxation without representation is, again, a clever piece of historical PR. The fact is, a lot of colonial anger stemmed from economic protectionism. They wanted to protect their own industries and merchants from British competition. The tea tax was just the most visible, most easily digestible symbol of a deeper resentment. It is. Like when people complain about woke, but they really just mad that their favorite old show is You and Co. truly relevant anymore. There's always a deeper, pettier reason hiding beneath the surface. This is where the political maneuverings of the past sound suspiciously like the political blunders of today. You have a government Britain making unpopular decisions to benefit a powerful corporation, East India Company, while simultaneously alienating a significant portion of its population, the colonists. And then, when the population reacts with outrage, the government doubles down with even harsher measures. Sound familiar? It's basically the plot of every other news cycle in 2025, just with less fancy hats and more social media outrage. The Mohawk disguise, that's another gem of absurd history. Did anyone actually believe these guys were real Native Americans? In the middle of Boston, in 1773, it was probably as convincing as a cheap Halloween costume from Spirit Halloween. But it served its purpose. It provided plausible deniability. And more importantly, it added a layer of theatricality to the whole spectacle. They were putting on a show. And what a show it was. It's the original history meme for costume parties. The Boston Tea Party was not a spontaneous uprising of the oppressed masses. It was a calculated, well-organized act of political theater, orchestrated by powerful local figures who had their own economic interests at stake. It was a marketing stunt, a viral moment designed to galvanize public opinion and pressure the British government. And it worked. It captured the imagination, rallied the discontented, and set a precedent for future acts of defiance. They invented the concept of going viral before the internet even existed, and the intolerable acts that followed. Pure, unadulterated political overreach. Shutting down Boston Harbor, effectively crippling the city's economy. Revoking the Massachusetts Charter, stripping away self-governance. Forcing quartering of soldiers, a direct assault on privacy and property. It's like a parent grounding their child for a week and then taking away their phone, their friends, their Xbox, and making them live in a tent in the backyard. The punishment rarely fits the crime when politicians are involved, does it? This is why dark humor history is so vital. It reminds us that our revered historical figures weren't saints. They were just people. Often petty, self-serving, and incredibly stupid people. Acting out their dramas on a grand scale. The Boston Tea Party wasn't a shining beacon of moral righteousness. It was a chaotic, ill-conceived act of defiance that accidentally stumbled into revolutionary significance. It's the history roast of their entire existence. Now, let's fast forward to 2025 for a moment. Imagine if today, a major corporation like Apple was pushing a new, heavily subsidized product, but it had a tiny, almost invisible tax attached to it. And a group of disgruntled tech enthusiasts, worried about their side hustles selling black market refurbished iPhones, decided to dump a cargo ship full of brand new iPads into the Pacific Ocean, dressed as, I don't know, furries? You think the government would be chill about that? No! You'd have the Coast Guard, the FBI, and probably a special ops team involved within hours. These colonists got off easy, all things considered. The Boston Tea Party, in essence, was the ultimate Karen moment. I demand to speak to your manager, King George III, about this outrageous tax on my tea. Except, instead of yelling at a retail worker, they threw millions of dollars of product overboard. It's the entitlement, the conviction that their personal grievance was the most important thing in the world. This truly captures the spirit of history. And what about the environmental impact? Think of all that tea steeping in the harbor. Did it attract some new species of caffeine-addicted jellyfish? Did it create a temporary boost in marine life? Energy levels? Leading to an aquatic rave? We'll never know. Because boring history textbooks don't cover the ecological fallout of colonial temper tantrums. But rest assured, Midnight Meme Historian is here to ask the important questions. This whole episode is a stark reminder that sometimes the most celebrated historical events are, at their core, just people being incredibly foolish. The Boston Tea Party wasn't a battle of ideas. It was a battle of egos, a clash of economic interests, and a masterclass in performative outrage. It's history for adults who aren't afraid to laugh at the ridiculousness of the past. The British government, led by the utterly forgettable Lord North, a man whose political career was as exciting as watching paint dry, but with more catastrophic consequences, genuinely believed they could strong-arm the colonists into submission. Lord North was basically the original head-in-the-sand politician, convinced that if he just ignored the problem, it would magically go away. Spoiler alert! It gets worse when you ignore problems, especially when those problems involve angry colonists and millions of dollars of tea. His decision to double down with the intolerable acts was a textbook example of how not to de-escalate a situation. It's like your ex sending increasingly aggressive texts after you tell them you're breaking up. You'd think after losing one global war, they'd have learned a thing or two about strategy. But no. They decided to poke the bear with a stick made of even more draconian laws. It's a historical fail that reads like a bad breakup story. The colonists, for their part, were masterful at playing the victim card. They framed the British actions as pure tyranny, as if they were being oppressed beyond measure, all while living in one of the most prosperous regions of the world. It's the ultimate gaslighting campaign, convincing everyone that a minor inconvenience was an existential threat. This kind of rhetorical manipulation makes for excellent sarcastic documentary material. And let's not forget the role of propaganda. Pamphlets, newspapers, and fiery speeches inflamed public opinion, turning a tax dispute into a battle for freedom. They were basically the original viral content creators, churning out clickbait headlines and emotionally charged rhetoric to manipulate them as. It's the unfiltered history of how public opinion is manufactured then and now. So, the next time you hear someone talk about the heroic Boston Tea Party, remember the absurd history of it all. Remember the cultural appropriation, the property damage, the economic self-interest, and the sheer glorious stupidity of everyone involved. Because that, my friends, is the true story. And that is why you should hit that subscribe button if you enjoy watching dead people's bad decisions. This is Midnight Meme Historian, signing off. But not before I ask you, which modern politician or celebrity would you compare Samuel Adams to? Someone who's a master of hype, maybe a bit of a stirrer, and ultimately a chaos agent. Drop your wildest, most unhinged comparisons in the comments below. Because here at Midnight Meme Historian, we believe the past is best served with a side of savage mockery, much like a good old history roast